Hey, good evening. Good to see you all here. Tonight we're going to be talking about a topic that has had so many people all around the world for many, many years trying to understand, and that is the handbags of the gods. We're going to look at some interesting images tonight from different cultures and different time periods, and we're going to tie it all together. And believe it or not, we're really going to spend quite some time in the biblical text because some of the major clues are right there. When I started to explore all of the stuff about 3.5 years ago, I was looking at all of the different images that were out there in archaeology. I've explained many times how I didn't really listen to what everyone was saying. I would turn the volume down and put these videos of people wandering around these archaeological sites with their cameras, their phones, and I would just put them on double speed, and then I would have them playing in the background and just keep watching them. And very quickly I started to see that there was this symbol that was all over the place. And it's called the handbags of the gods. We would see different gods carved into stone in different areas, and they're all carrying the same handbag. Now, that'd be stylistically different from culture to culture, but it was very clear, very obvious that they're all the same thing. What is that? Well, as I started putting the pieces together, it became abundantly clear what it was. And it wasn't until months and months later where I actually learned there was some mystery about this. There was some discrepancy. People didn't really know what it was. I think tonight you'll see that, I'm kind of being a bit cheeky here. I don't want to seem arrogant, but I've got the definitive explanation there. I don't see how this is not it. And if you think that it's something else, then I'm sure that'll turn up in the comments below. But one of the most important things is that we look at the evidence and try to construct things from our natural reality, not from some metaphor. The tendency of humans, we'll talk about this a little bit in just a second, is to turn everything into a metaphor. That way you can turn it into anything you want it to be. Well, I think it's about this. Okay, well then you'll turn it into you'll say it's not real, it's a metaphor. And therefore, because it's a metaphor, well, it's whatever I want it to be. And who are you to say otherwise? That's not the approach I take. I look at things from a natural world perspective, as a natural scientist, to gather all of the evidence and try to make sense of it. The majority of the time when you accumulate enough evidence, what something is just begins to speak to you. It's very clear. You don't need to jump to conjecture. Let's get into it and take a look. We're going to start right off with some of these images, and of course, we're going to start right off with the explanation, because I know a lot of people in kind of the ancient aliens and Anunnaki kind of genres are going to watch this, and they want the answer right up front, because then they want to be able to say, no, it's not, you're wrong. Okay, well, that's fine. Let's give them the answer right up front. And then we'll go through and explain exactly why that is the correct answer. I think that's the best way of doing this. So, with our wonderful mind maps as normal, we're going to zoom around here a whole bunch. And let's take a look here at right up front at the explanation. The tree of life and the mysterious handbags of the gods. You can't talk about one without the other. The handbags carry the fruit, the most precious cargo of all DNA-based life, the key to biological immortality, a nutrient that activates telomeres in the cell, regrowing our telomeres. In this study, we discover the reality of the promise Enki Yeshua made to humankind, biological immortality, and the right to live alongside the gods as friends. So let's start looking at some of the history of this idea. Where does it come from? Throughout multiple ancient cultures, we find the tree of life carved into stone along with the handbags of the gods, and evidence of a single family in control of humanity. So let's take a look at the gods. Let's start up here with some of the Mesopotamian gods. This is a very common and popular image. You'll find this very easily if you search for the Anunnaki on a Google image search. And we know who these three people are in this image. We've talked about it in other videos. On the left-hand side here, we find Enlil Nunamnir, also known as Yahweh in the Old Testament of the Bible, at least in parts of the Old Testament. On the right-hand side, we have Enki Ea, who's also Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus. And the person that is in the winged disc above is their father, who, at least in the Sumerian cuneiform text, which is the text that we see written across this image here, his name is Anu. We see in the middle here something that looks organic, something that looks like a plant, and that is indeed the tree of life. This is a very, very important object to them, and even they themselves require to consume the fruit of the tree of life periodically in order to stay alive. And we'll look at a point of reference for that in the Bible. Yeah, the Bible, the Anunnaki are all through, of course. The Anunnaki kind of are the Bible, right? You'll notice just off to the sides here, they've got handbags in their hands. Their attendants have handbags, and we can look at a larger image here and see if we can enlarge this a little bit. There we go. So you can see this a little bit better. Now you've got these people that are approaching the fruit of the tree of life, and they've got attendants behind them, and they're carrying those handbags. We find similar images all throughout antiquity. Here's an Akkadian image. And kind of everywhere we look, we start to see these things. So here's a closer up view. You can find many images like this if you just do an image search on Google or some other search engine, and you'll start to see, if you search for handbags of the gods, and you're starting to see the similarities. This is a very old one here. This one has been named as being Nimrod. That's wrong. The Academy's making a mistake there. That's all right. They make lots of mistakes. And so here you start to see the handbag in clearer detail. Here we have one from this pillar from Indonesia, and you can see that on this pillar there are these handbags. This here is the feathered serpent, or Quetzalcoatl, from Southern America. And you can clearly see him holding the handbag. You can see the emphasis put on the handbag. It's very, very important. Here again, I think this is a Mayan image, and here he's holding the handbag. Here in Tula, Mexico, we have the Toltec warriors, the very, very famous Toltec warriors. You may have seen this, and it's in shadow, but we've got a better image here so we can see with the sun on their side. But you can see they've got the handbag to their side, and you can see in the middle here they've got this tree of life. Interesting, huh? And yes, there is a wristwatch. We're not going to really talk about that in this video, but the wristwatch, there's a lot of mystery around that. I think that the wristwatch designates the wearer as one of the caretakers of the gardens of the gods. Here you can see these handbags in these images by their side, and you can see these blocks. Now, these are very interesting blocks, aren't they? I mean, circular. I don't know who came along here. This is not some image glitch. I looked at many, many, many images of the scene, and someone has come along and abrased the surface to remove this. Now, it's possible they were kind of stuck in the ground, but it doesn't look like that. You could say, well, that was the part that was sticking out of the ground and it eroded. I don't buy that. Doesn't look that way at all. But you see how these fit onto each other. They've got a male and female connection, and one locks on to the one on top. So these are in South America. The first ones we're looking at were in the Middle East, the Mesopotamian region, Iran, Iraq, Turkey. What's going on? The same thing all over the place. Well, isn't that odd? So let's look at a couple more. Here's some in India, in Hinduism, and we see someone here leaning up against a tree that has also these pine cone shaped fruit in the tree, and you can see that there's two handbags here. This one on the right side, the bottom has been broken off a little bit, but there's actually two bags hanging in the tree. And in this one we can see a similar thing. So we've got this person seated at the tree, and up in the tree we also have these two handbags, right? In fact, on the right side there, it might be kind of two handbags that are really close together. Now, let's take a look at some more. Let me just close this up. It's gets a little crowded here. Let's start to take a closer look at some of these handbags. Now, there's that wristwatch. You can see the bags are very clearly defined. Here's a really good one. This is one of the best ones we have. And this is all in relief, right? So this is in, when we want to do it the easy way, we'll carve rock away, and the rock that we're carving away is what's creating the image. But here it's the other way around, right? It's a relief. So they're carving everything away that is not the image and leaving behind rock that is the image. Much, much, much more difficult, and yet in almost every example, that's what it is. Now, this is the one that really did it for me. I was looking at so many of these handbags and trying to confirm, like, are you sure about this? What do we see on this handbag? We see the flower. That'll be the same flower that's on the wristwatches that they're carrying, these bangles, these bands that they have on their hands. And what are these other four? They kind of look like eyes, but they're not eyes. It'd be kind of weird eyes. They're cross sections of a seed. It's exactly how we would draw it today, right? That's exactly what I see. You've got the cross section of a seed and the flower, and of course the flower is what then turns into the fruit. It's really, really pretty amazing. Now, this one here, this is from Göbekli Tepe. This is one of the more famous pillars at Göbekli Tepe, and you see at the top of this, these three handbags of the gods. Now, many people have tried to say, oh, no, these are actually referencing constellations and all these kinds of things. There's a lot of back and forth over many people kind of debating this. I haven't really entered into that debate at all. I don't really care too much. I have a reasonable idea on what Göbekli Tepe is. I think it is part of the Garden of Eden complex that we read about in Genesis 2 and 3. And these are the oldest examples of the handbags of the gods that we have. Of course, that would be natural. You'd have the handbags of the gods in the Garden of Eden, where we know from the biblical text that the tree of life grew and other trees as well. All right. And these are old and they're eroded, and Göbekli Tepe was for some reason buried, but they stopped excavating Göbekli Tepe when they uncovered this pillar. In fact, they didn't even fully excavate this particular pillar for more than 1 year. They stopped work. It's very, very suspicious. Somebody else out there knows what's going on. When people start to put all these dots together, it's going to rewrite history. I hope this video goes far and wide. I hope people start to really think about this stuff, because it is rewriting history. It's telling us where we came from. It's telling us a lot about who we are and who they are. Now, what if we had one of these in real life? Well, we do. Thanks to J.J. Ainsworth, who's a bit of an explorer. She travels around and she found this in a Swedish museum. And what's remarkable about this bucket is that it has this gold band. And on this gold band, we have this scene repeated over and over and over again all around it. Which is what? It's the exact same scene we just saw at the very beginning. It's the two figures with the handbags in their hands, approaching the tree of life. And here we can see they're taking the fruit from the tree of life. So what do you think it means when someone has a bucket and they're plucking fruit from a tree? Do you think the fruit and the bucket might be somehow related? See, there's not really any mystery here, in my opinion. I think the mystery is I don't think there is a mystery. I think it's quite obvious. I think that many people want to turn these into metaphor and want to say, well, let me explain what it's all about. You know, people do this with the biblical text over and over again, and I'm the one that jumps in and says, wait, instead of trying to tell me what the biblical text means, why don't you just accept what it actually says, right? There is this tendency to not accept what is written or what's in solid stone here, but to turn it into something else because we don't want to accept what's really going on, right? Maybe it's time we start to accept what's really going on here. So thank you very much to J.J. Ainsworth. I've communicated with her, and that's how I found out where she photographed this. This is in a Swedish museum, and I'd love to get over there. Or anyone in Sweden watching this, if you'd like to go to the museum, I'll get you the details. And if you could go and take some really, really high-resolution photos of this, I would really much appreciate it, more than you could imagine. So, what do all of these handbags contain? They contain the fruit of the tree of life. That is incredibly important to these guys. It regrows their telomeres, which infers biological immortality. Right? Now, we want to turn all of this into mythology, but it's not very helpful when we do that. Somebody with some pretty incredible intelligence and some kind of machinery carved all of these all over the ancient world, some of them in really incredible detail. And we come along and we want to say, oh, well, let me tell you what these people that were worshiping imaginary gods in their heads were thinking when they did this. Yeah. How about you just accept what's here in history? Right? I think that's a much better way, a much better approach, is to simply accept what history is telling us. Let's now take a little look at telomeres. So telomeres are your biological clock. So we have a cell here, and we have a telomere on the ends of a strand of DNA. Those are the little red tips. And when a copy job is taking place, here, a ribosome is coming along and replicating the strand, it has to have a little bit of track to run along. And every time it runs along this track, which it's doing during replication of the cell, a little bit breaks off. And they get shorter and shorter and shorter. Eventually, they get so short that the machine that does the copying cannot complete the job. And the cell abandons the replication process and reabsorbs all of the work that it's already done. And now we have a cell that can no longer replicate. So when you are born, or when you're fertilized, you have about 15,000 base pairs. When you are born, you have about 9,600 base pairs left for the rest of your entire life. And so as your telomeres, represented by this red color on the end here, gets shorter and shorter, you become older and older. I want to play you a video by Dr. Bill Andrews. Now, I've known Dr. Bill Andrews for some time. Not personally, I know of him, I should say. He makes a supplement or licenses the technology to make a supplement that I take every single day. And so let's take a look at his video right now.
Dr. William H. Andrews has worked in the biotech industry for 31 years. The last 19 years focused solely on the aging process.
Please give a level 10 welcome to Dr. Bill Andrews.
My technology is going to change the world. I'm this close to solving the problem of aging. I personally plan on living to be at least 150 and running a 7-minute mile when I'm 130 years old.
Curing aging is a race. The clock ticks once, telomerase pushes it back. Ticks again, telomerase pushes it back.
The theory says that every time our cells divide, the tips of our chromosomes, called telomeres, become shorter. Eventually, they become so short, they stop our cells dividing. We can't produce new cells, and so we age.
But as you grow older, the telomeres become damaged and frayed, and as they stop working, we start aging, experiencing things like hearing and memory loss. Scientists took mice who were prematurely aged, added an enzyme, and essentially turned their telomeres back on. You can see it before the enzyme, after.
Their brain function improved, their fertility was restored. It was a remarkable reversal of the aging process.
The literature tells us that it's, I would say, 95% certain or better that if we can find ways to lengthen the telomeres, we are going to reverse aging. The bottom line is this. When cells divide, telomeres shorten. And bad things happen when telomeres get short. When a cell divides, the genetic material inside that cell needs to be copied. This is called DNA replication. During this process, enzymes that replicate a strand of DNA are unable to continue replicating all the way to the end, which causes the loss of some DNA. As an analogy, think of DNA as a long row of bricks, and of DNA replication as a bricklayer walking backwards on top of a brick wall, laying a new layer on top of that row. When the end of the wall is reached, the bricklayer finds himself standing on top of the bricks he's supposed to replicate. But since he can't put down a brick where his feet are, he steps back and falls off the wall, leaving the very end of the wall bare. As a result, the new copy of the wall is shorter. Just like this brick wall was copied imperfectly, our DNA is unable to copy itself perfectly. When a strand is replicated, the new strand is shorter than the old strand. Now what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out a way to prevent that shortening and actually re-lengthen telomeres. Our reproductive cells have no telomere shortening, and this is why our children are born younger than we are, because our reproductive cells have no aging process. So in trying to understand why this is happening in our reproductive cells, we discovered an enzyme called telomerase. Telomerase re-lengthens telomeres. Every time a reproductive cell divides, the telomere still gets a little bit shorter, but then telomerase re-lengthens it. And in our research, we've discovered if we add more telomerase, the telomeres actually get longer and the aging in the cells actually gets reversed. The cells become younger.
We want to find a drug that will get inside of our cells and turn that telomerase gene on so all the rest of our cells in our body don't age, just like our reproductive cells don't age.
Now with the $33 million that we've spent, we've already discovered 900 different chemicals that when added to human cells grown in a petri dish will actually cause the production of telomerase.
So I actually take a product that is licensed from Dr. Bill Andrews. He says they've found all these compounds. All these compounds have been found in nature. And I take this every single day. This is from a health food company called Isogenesis. And they make this product called Isogenesis. And there's several different capsules in here. These dark ones are the ones that contain the nutrients, these compounds, that Dr. Bill Andrews has found that support telomeres. And, there's a lot of people that have seen some pretty profound results from taking these every day. And they're powerful antioxidants. He's done all of these in vitro tests, these test tube tests with all of these compounds to try to find something that will activate telomerase in the cell. I've been taking this product every day for about 8.5 years now, and I will continue to. And it's been through several revisions, and this is, I think, the 3rd generation, and right now we're waiting on the release of the 4th generation, and everything that's in it is a natural plant compound. So, as he said, there's about a 95% certainty. Now, there'll be other factors involved, but the major factor in aging is the length of your telomeres. And as we've been able to do in mice, if we can regrow these telomeres, if we can activate telomerase in the cell, your telomeres will not just stop breaking off, but they will regrow, and you don't just stop aging. As in the mouse example, you become younger again. In other words, your hair will begin to be restored to its natural color. And I've heard just anecdotal stories, of course, but I've heard of people, men and women, that have started to take this product and seen their hair color at least somewhat restored. That's pretty interesting. People with bad arthritis have again, just anecdotal stories that I've heard, have really seen quite a change. That's what a nutrient in the fruit of the tree of life does. So we have the gardens of the gods, and let's talk a little bit about metaphor here. Ignorance, I'm not using this as a pejorative, but ignorance of a subject matter leads to the creation of metaphor. I don't understand, therefore let me invent something that kind of fits in with what I believe. Everyone has a tendency to turn things they don't understand into a metaphor they've invented. But we do understand this. We don't need metaphor. The trees are real, actual botanical plants that grow in soil and produce a harvest of fruit that contains various nutrients. One of these nutrients activates telomerase in the cell. So trees transmute matter, right? Trees are machines. They take carbon dioxide from the air, and they take inorganic rock minerals from the ground, and they convert them into essential nutrients for our survival. So there are machines that have been created that keep this machine going. And the Anunnaki rely on consumption of the fruit to maintain life, and that's why it's such a big deal. They injure themselves, they break their leg, or something bad happens. You can produce immediate, rapid replication of cells, in other words, rapid healing, by consuming the fruit. Here's a psalm from the biblical text. This is a psalm of Asaph. This is Psalm 82. We talk about Psalm 82 a lot because it's one of the clearest examples of the Anunnaki in the Bible. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment, or court. And here he talks about how they need to start treating the humans properly. He says, how long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? It goes on about this and gives some moral principles on the things that they should be following. But look at the end here, where he says, I said, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like humans, you shall die and fall like any prince. We've talked before about how the princes are the ones that were the human apprentices of the kings. So we see that the Anunnaki required this, and we see them carving themselves into stone all over the world, representing the absolute importance. So we are the gods, and these, there are stories of these medicine men coming with a bag of medicines that are able to heal people and all kinds of things, right? Let's look at some stories from ancient history. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, we find a story of a hybrid, someone that had been the result of a union between a human and one of the Anunnaki, and his name is Gilgamesh, very popular epic, very popular story Everybody should probably read that. There's a Tibetan story, a story of the Tree of Life. A Tibetan story talks about a merchant that bought a special parrot for a large sum of money, and the parrot then asks for a leave of absence and returns with seeds of the Tree of Life, instructing the merchant to plant them and eat the fruit after 3 years to become young again. An old couple are the first to eat the fruit, and they indeed become young again, and wanted to worship the merchant as a god. In the book of Enoch, which is generally considered non-canonical, is not part of the biblical text, although some argue it should be, states that in the time of the great judgment, God will give all those whose names are in the book of life to eat from the tree of life. In Baha'i, it says, "Have you forgotten that true and radiant morn, when in those hallowed and blessed surroundings you were all gathered in my presence beneath the shade of the tree of life, which is planted in the all-glorious paradise?" There's so many examples here. The Bible, immortality comes from the tree of life. It's something that Christians don't really talk about, but is very clear. We'll spend a lot more time just in a moment on that. There's a lot of evidence of this in the biblical text. Buddhism, the Bo tree, also called the Bodhi tree, according to Buddhist tradition, is the papal under which the Buddha sat when he attained enlightenment. In Chinese mythology, a Taoist story tells of a tree that produces a peach of immortality every 3,000 years. Interesting, with the orbit of Nibiru most likely being every 3,600 years. And anyone who eats the fruit receives immortality. Now, the Anunnaki do not need to consume this fruit all the time. They don't have to consume it daily or even annually, or probably even every 1,000 years. But every so often, they will have to. And Yahweh, who's probably still exiled here on planet Earth, has been deprived of this fruit for quite some time and is probably starting to show signs of aging. In Norse mythology, the apples from Idun's ash box provide immortality for the gods. In Slavic culture, there is a belief of one source for all rivers from the rock Alatia, upon which a tree of life stands. In Islam, the tree of immortality is the tree of life motif as it appears in the Quran. In the book of Enoch states that in the time of the great judgment, God will give, I think we already read that, didn't we? We did. I've got that twice. In Mesoamerican culture, the ancient Maya king, who became king at only 12 years of age, has tree of life inscriptions within the walls of his burial place. In North America, we have a Sioux who describes his vision in which, after dancing around a dying tree that has never bloomed, he is transported to the other world where he meets wise elders, 12 men and 12 women, which is the divine council. And the elders tell him that they will bring him to meet our father, the two-legged chief, and bring him to the center of a garden where he sees the tree in full leaf and bloom and the chief standing against the tree. In Turkish symbology, the tree of life is a central symbol. And in Hinduism, the tree of life is guarded in the garden under the control of Indra, the king of the gods. In one story, for a very long time, gods and demigods who are believed to be fathered by the same god and have different mothers, again going back to the story of Yahweh and Yeshua, and after a long time, frequent battles between the two half-brother clans. It looks like I didn't complete that, but look at that and how interesting that correlates in Hinduism to what we're discovering about Yeshua and Yahweh. There's no coincidence. It's the same stories that are echoed all around the planet. There is one family, they're in charge, they made us, and all the evidence is really quite clear. But there is this tendency, people don't want to accept it because, well, they have all their own ideas. And my tendency is to just keep looking and looking and trying to find out what is really real. Now, where we find the richest source of all of this information, other than the carvings that we find all over the world, is in the biblical text. This is really, really fascinating. So let's start here. we're starting in Genesis. This is in the Garden of Eden. Yahweh is taking control of earth and moves man into what is most likely the Göbekli Tepe compound that we saw before, with the 3 handbags of the gods across the top pillar. And probably is the Garden of Eden. And when I say probably, it's pretty much a slam dunk. But, you know, I'm the kind of person that just, well, we'll see what, you know, it is about 70 miles away from the exact biblical location. That's pretty darn close. In Genesis 2, it says, and Yahweh planted a garden in Eden. The tree of life was in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Yahweh commanded the man, saying, you may surely eat of every tree in the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat it you shall surely die. Yahweh then evicts the humans from the garden, and what he says next is really important. Behold, the man has become like one of us in knowing good and evil. Now lest he reach out his hand and take also of the tree of life, and eat and live forever. Therefore Yahweh evicted them from the Garden of Eden. So right here in the biblical text we've got in Genesis, and we're going to see here right at the very end as well, in the last chapter of the book of Revelation, we see a confirmation of this whole thing. That immortality is not some spiritual thing, it's in a physical form, and you are restored by the fruit. So now in the Gospel of John, it says, Yeshua said to them, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst. For this is the will of my Father, that everyone who looks on the Son and believes in him shall have eternal life. And he uses these food analogies a little bit, doesn't he? He actually says here at one point that I have food you know not of. So here in John 4:32, he says, meanwhile the disciples were urging him, Rabbi, have something to eat. And Yeshua told them, I have food to eat that you don't know about. And the disciples asked each other, did someone bring him something to eat? Interesting. Did the fruit of life bring Yeshua back to life? There's an interesting thing that occurs here. This is after Yeshua had been resurrected, and while they were walking, Yeshua approached them and began walking with them. Although they saw him, they didn't recognize him. Why didn't the disciples recognize him? Was he younger? The simplest way of bringing Yeshua back from the dead is not to perform some woo-woo, but is simply to put an extract of the fruit of life into his mouth and watch these cells suddenly roar back to life. And here we find in Revelation where Yeshua is talking, and he says, this is in Revelation 2 verse 7, he says, I will give the privilege of eating from the fruit of the tree of life which stands in the paradise of God to everyone who wins the victory. Goes on here, Revelation 22, this is the last chapter of the entire Bible. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb through the middle of the street of the city. Also on either side of the river, the fruit of life with its 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit each month. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. And we see just a little bit further on, he says, blessed are those who keep themselves clean, so that they may have the right to the tree of life, and that they may enter the city by the gates. And then there's a warning right at the very end. This is Revelation 22:18 and 19, where he says, I warn everyone who hears the words of the prophecy of this book. If anyone takes away from the words of the book of this prophecy, God will take away his share in the tree of life and in the holy city. So we find all of these things in antiquity, find all of these incredible images, and it all seems to speak about the same thing. And as we look at all of these images, we start to find a total correlation to what we find in the Bible. When we look at the different references to the tree of life throughout all of these ancient cultures, we start to see that it's just common. It's just everywhere. There is a garden that the gods plant with a real seed that produces a real plant that produces a flower and fruit. And they eat it. It's just like if you don't consume some kind of a citrus fruit that contains vitamin C or a berry that contains vitamin C, you will eventually get scurvy, you'll get very sick, and you can die. And how do you turn that around? How do you bring your life back from certain death from scurvy? And it will kill you. You simply eat an orange. How funny is that? That literally to save your life, all you would do is eat an orange. Because the orange contains the nutrient that your body requires, ascorbic acid. Unbelievable, isn't it? So that is the answer. That is the definitive answer to what is in the handbags of the gods. They carry around, and it's not just one tree, of course. We know of at least two trees. There's the tree of life, and there's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This tree that, when you eat its fruit, gives you conscious awareness, makes you self-aware. Oh, I'm here. Oh, I'm naked, right? As in the story in the Garden of Eden. The handbags of the gods contain the fruit from the gardens of the gods, including the fruit of the tree of life and probably many other fruit as well. We know in the biblical text that we read just before, it said that there were 12 kinds of fruit. So I don't think there's really any mystery here. It's a very simple thing. These bags are what they use to carry around the fruit, the most precious cargo that they have, in these buckets. We have the stories of these medicine men coming up to people with bags and giving them medicines from these bags. It says in the biblical text that the trees, the leaves of the tree are also medicine. We might want to turn all of this into some metaphor. I don't know why we do that. We're dealing with another species that made humankind here on this earth. After they came here to mine earth for minerals, they had a labor dispute. They decided that they would create a primitive worker who apparently, according to the Genesis story, didn't have self-awareness, didn't have consciousness, a primitive worker. And then all of these events transpired to get to where we are now, where 2,000 years ago, one of them came here and said, we're going to set up a rescue mission to come and get you out of this mess that one of our other people has put you in, because we don't want you to be slaves anymore, and just be patient. It's going to take some time. And I think that's what's going on here. And with everything that we're looking at right now, it really does seem that this is all now coming to a head. Other parts of that book of Revelation that we just read, specifically chapter 13, are now starting to become real life. They're talking about vaccine passports, and so that you can buy and sell once you have this certificate. All of these kinds of things that have been recorded in these somewhat ancient books, about 1900 years old, that said these certain things are going to happen, and now we can look around and look at the news on our screens and see, well, that's interesting because this is precisely what is happening right now. it's interesting that Christianity doesn't talk about any of this. It's in their Bible. Of course, we just looked at a whole bunch of it in the Bible, but Christians don't really acknowledge this. They don't know anything about it. But this is how the humans are given eternal life. This is what it says in the book. So I really encourage you to start reading the Bible. Don't become a Christian, but the biblical texts have been ignored by most of the ancient aliens community and people that are looking into all kinds of things, including people that are just looking into the ancient history of the earth, and they discard the biblical texts, and they say it's all a load of nonsense. Well, there might be some changes to the text here and there, but there's an awful lot here that actually connects with everything. And all seems to be actually telling us the same story. So if you haven't watched my video, 2 Gardens and a Snake, where we go into far more detail on what actually happened in the Garden of Eden, then I really suggest strongly that you go watch that video, 2 Gardens and a Snake, and then follow that up with kind of the follow-up video, which is, who is Yahweh? To understand, who is this guy on the left-hand side here of, there's these 2 people, right, facing this tree. Who are these 2 people? This is Yahweh and Yeshua. Neither of them are the Father. But we should know a whole lot more about Yahweh from history. And in 2 Gardens and a Snake and Who is Yahweh, we explore exactly who is Yahweh and what really happened back in the Garden of Eden. And it's not what Christianity has told you it says. And all we do is go through the biblical text. The problem is that the vast majority of Christians don't read the Bible. And it's time you start, because you're being lied to, you're being tricked, you're being deceived by people that know you're never going to pick that book up and read it. And you have to. You have to read it. You might say it's a religious book. It tells the story of people that were bound up in religion, for sure. But that doesn't mean there's not an incredible wealth of information in the biblical text. I'm not a Christian. I'm a former Christian. I'm not a Christian. I'm just trying to figure out what on earth is going on here. Hopefully this has answered the question. I know there's a lot of people that debate this, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people disputing my findings here. I look forward to seeing your comments. Have an awesome night, and thank you so very much for joining me, and thank you to all of my financial supporters who have made this work possible. We do these every Sunday, and I'm so excited to do it. And also make sure you're on the podcast. If you haven't noticed, we're now podcasting every day, and you can find that podcast feed at israelanderson.com. All right? Have an awesome night. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care. Bye-bye.